start by creating a plan. So you need to work out your niche. So say, like for me, say you're a gym brand. You need to work out, so we're going to do one post a week on the gym wear. We're going to do one post a week on workouts. We're going to do one post a week on post-workout foods, or what I have had in a day, because that's your inside scoop. That's your personality, because you're showing what you've eaten in a day. You don't have to do that. It's not really anything to do with business, but people are getting the inside scoop and the personality. And then within that, you're showing your gym wear, you're showing your gym supplements, whatever it is, and people are going, so where did you get those leggings from? Where did you get those supplements from? And it's about organically adding your products into it.
I like to call my unlimited content matrix, and essentially you break your business down into 4 pillars, right? You're welcome. Before I even start, you break your business down into 4 pillars. You say, okay, let's say for example it's Crunches by Susie. She has really likes, fashion, right? She really likes hair, and there's another 2. So you break down hair and fashion, and you get their keywords. So you say, okay, fashion, we have models, we have material, we have this, that, and the other. And then for each of those keywords, you'd break that down into the who, what, when, where, how, and why.
What's sustainable happens quickly. Nothing. Like very few of you can show me an example of something that is sustainable, that is built quickly. I look at a plant. You look at a tree. Look, the biggest tree in the forest here. How long has it been there for? Thousands of years. It's not coincidence. You look at buildings. How long did they build a building? How long does it stay standing for?
Yeah.
Look at a baby. If a baby is born too soon, it's at risk of dying. Everything in life. There's not one thing in life here that can happen quickly and is sustainable. So when I tell you the post here for the next 6 months here, that's me using the laws of life and nature and what we see around us to understand here that nothing in life that is built quickly is sustainable.
I love the psychology of it. And I think sometimes with digital marketing, we forget that it's the same thing. It's just using different platforms, and the speed in which the digital platforms allow us to market to our audience compared to traditional offline is just incomparable. It's just crazy fast. And also the accessibility of how many people we can reach. And so it can be quite overwhelming when we think about the bigger picture of digital marketing, but really when it comes down to it, it's about the psychology that we've always known. And that goes right back to, hey, I've got some of these carrots. I've noticed that you haven't got any carrots. What about these? Should we swap some carrots for some of your potatoes? So it's about the psychology of somebody wanting or needing something and then somebody else being able to provide.
We call it edutainment. So it's education and entertainment. And don't be scared by the entertainment word, because entertainment is broad. Anyone can find anything interesting. It doesn't need to be humorous or anything like that. Teach us about this, and you can do that with a hook. So one tip for video content is you need to capture someone's attention in the first 3 to 5 seconds. You need a hook, and that hook it needs to draw in that person. So on TikTok, you can write a cover title on your video. If your service is beneficial in some way, a hook on that cover title could be, this is what really saves me time when I'm ... That's a hook, because now I want to know what saves you time. So this is where services can really play up to, how is this beneficial for you? Why should you be parting money? How can this change my routine in the best way possible? So that is everything that they need to be pushing.
Good morning, everyone. Well, I think it's afternoon now. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you're watching this from. Welcome again to another edition of UKBF Talks. And today, we've genuinely got a really cracking episode, because I've been speaking to this guy. This guy is he's looking dapper as well. He's even got a fresh trim just for today. So I know that he's carrying a lot of weighty stuff, a lot of gems, a lot of advice about how to get our businesses, how to get our brands appealing and featured to journalists so that they can get us to the world. So today I'm going to be speaking to Mr. Dan Martin. So without further ado, let's bring Dan into the room.
Hello, Jacob.
You don't have to thank me for that intro about you, Dan. You can just give me the check later on.
I'll send you the check later.
Exactly. You already know. How are you doing today, Dan?
I'm very well, thanks. I'm delighted to be here. Thank you very much.
No, that's good. That's good. So we already know what we're going to be talking about today. Today, we're going to be focusing on how to make ourselves as businesses, brands, an attractive proposition for yourself, for other journalists, so that we can hopefully nudge you to get us featured in these publications that you write to so many people. So before we go into it, I always like to ask our guests, who the heck are you? And why do we need to listen to whatever you have to say to us today?
Lovely. I like that. So I'm Dan. So I've been a journalist for 21 years. And in that 21 years, I've always written about startups and small businesses. So I started many years ago as a very badly paid researcher at Sky News. And I wanted to become a journalist. So I did a postgrad course. And like a lot of journalists, often they want to go into sport or travel, like the glamorous side of the job. So I wanted to do travel, never happened, but I got work experience on a website about startups, and that's when the bug started, I suppose. So I was writing for free back then as an intern, when you could do that with interns, for a startup website. And my career then, I've just ended up working for small business titles, initially as a staff member. In fact, many years ago, I used to work for UKBF. And I was the editor of UKBF in a previous guise, so I know the forums really well. But since 2020, after I was working at a business group called Enterprise Nation, I went freelance. Obviously, 2020, interesting time to go freelance, but it paid off actually. So I've been self-employed ever since. So why you should listen, I suppose, because I've been writing about small businesses for 21 years. So, and I've written about a lot of them. So I think I've probably got some insights into how you can get people like me interested in what you do.
No, that's really good to hear. And just going off what you just said at the end there, you are now self-employed. So basically, you're running your own enterprise. You're basically running your own business. So you're in a unique position to be able to relate to the people that are watching and listening to this conversation as well. So I'm just going to go straight into the first question, because I've got loads of questions for you today. And that question is, how important is media coverage for small businesses? And what benefits can they expect from getting featured in the press?
Yeah, so it is super important. It's something that pretty much any business can do. I think the perception is that, PR is all about being, on the Today programme or on BBC News or, in the big stuff. But there are thousands and thousands of niche websites, publications, nowadays podcasts, which are like part of the media landscape. So it is sort of really not easy. Well, it is relatively easy if you know what you're doing, but super important to get coverage. In terms of what it gives you, it's brand exposure. So it's exposure of your brand. It builds reputation around your brand. The more press coverage you get, it sort of adds, as I said, it adds to your reputation. It makes you look more authentic, makes you look more credible. Obviously, it can lead to sales. So that's harder, because you can't necessarily assume just because you've been featured in something, thousands of people are going to buy your stuff. It can do, if you're featured in a massive publication that, is very powerful, very viral, it's very relevant to your customers, they link to your website, it could lead to sales. But PR is a bit more about the long game for most businesses. It's about using the media to build your reputation, build brand exposure, outreach to customers. And, if you, as hope you'll learn from this, you can do it yourself for free. Like, PR people are very important to the industry, and, they're very important to my job. But, at the early stages of running a business, you might not necessarily be able to pay for a PR company. So there are lots of ways that you can do it for free. So essentially, it's free marketing.
Yeah. Before I move on to my next question. You touched on something there about it being the long game. Now,
Yeah.
as you're aware of, we live in a very, very, very microwave generation right now, where
Absolutely.
the attention span of a reader, a watcher, is literally vaporized within seconds, right?
Yeah.
Bearing this in mind, how does the long game, why is the long game still an important thing for anybody in any level of business? Bearing in mind that, like I said, we live in a generation where attention span isn't as it used to be.
Yeah. Well, because of that attention span, I guess, because you could get some massive coverage and you get a lot of attention, and then then it's gone. So it's about building that. It's about building the brand exposure and credibility. So the more coverage you get, the more it shows your business is authentic, is knows what it's doing. The more customers you're potentially reaching. So absolutely, you can be featured, in something once, as I said, and it might go viral and it might have a massive impact on you. But you shouldn't really go into PR and media relations sort of with that, trying to get that quick win. It's like all marketing, you've got to think long term and what it's going to bring to your business. And like you said, attention spans are much, 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 much shorter. So that coverage, 20 odd years ago when I started, you got some coverage that may have had more of a longer impact than nowadays, where people move on quickly. The next story comes 20 seconds later. So yeah, it's like everything. It's like a long-term strategy. And then particularly when you start to get into bigger media relations, and maybe you are paying an agency for press and you're doing like big PR stunts or big PR events, then obviously that's something you've got to plan for, and you need budget for, and you've got to get ROI out of it. So yeah, I would say PR for most people is a long-term thing.
Long-term play, yeah. No, that's really insightful to know. My next question is, what are some of the common misconceptions about approaching journalists like yourself, and how can businesses avoid these pitfalls that they often do?
So one of the big ones is that journalists are quite scary, and you can't really talk to us directly unless you're a PR agent who knows what they're doing. But we're not all scary. I'd like to think I'm not. Um, and you can like do it yourself. So there is a bit of, I think there is a bit of a fear around journalists. Some journalists obviously are looking for scoops and they're undercover and they're looking to expose bad practices. The kind of journalist that I am is I write for organizations that support small businesses. So I'm generally looking to tell positive stories, or I'm looking for small businesses' reaction maybe to something negative, such as the economy right now. But I'm not looking to expose any small businesses. Obviously, if I came across something that needed telling, I would tell it. But I think to overcome that, social media has made it much, much easier. Pre-social media, it was hard to know who journalists were. You could find their names in a newspaper, and then you'd have to call the news desk of a newspaper, say, that's potentially quite scary to talk to a journalist on the phone. But nowadays, you can follow us all on social media, despite the criticism Twitter or X or whatever it's called these days is getting. I think Twitter is still the most useful platform for journalists, because it's where the news happens. You can get to us quickly, and it's a way to get over that fear factor. You can follow us, you can see what we're tweeting about, you can just engage with a post. I tweet a lot about work and a lot about business, but then I also tweet about a lot of other random stuff like TV, or I live in Bristol and I tweet a lot about the city and arts and culture. So you can engage with me as a person and
Yeah,
build a bit of a relationship, or not even engage, just watch what I talk about, and then when you feel your story is right, then it's time to potentially pitch. So I think that's one of the biggest misconceptions, is that journalists aren't approachable, you know. But
yeah,
we're just like doing a job, so you know, just like
yeah.
anybody else.
Well, I'm a huge football fan, and I, over the recent years, have seen the impact of journalists specifically on Twitter, because people probably, when it gets to transfer season, for example, which we're currently in right now,
Mm.
everybody's following all the journalists to see what
Yeah,
rumors, what information's coming out. Everyone's
yeah,
tapping up, like trying to even break into the bedroom of journalists to find out what information do you have that I need to know. So like you said, finding them on places like Twitter. Other than social media, where else could people find and interact with journalists? Are there like events or things like that they should be looking out for, specifically for business?
Yeah, I mean, there's business events. So, engage, obviously, group, platforms like UK Business Forums might run events. Enterprise Nation, who I've worked for and do now freelance, and other business groups, they'll often invite media to their events, because they want their events covered. But the audience there is small business owners. So there might be a journalist in the room that you could just go up and talk to. In terms of other places, I think it probably is networking events. There are, journalists are quite, we're quite busy and we get invited to a lot of stuff. But if it's something very relevant to what we're writing about, then we will go to it. So I'd say offline, that's probably the biggest thing, is look out for business events that you potentially think a journalist might be hanging out at. And even if you're doing your own event, right, invite journalists to, particularly local. I was going to talk about that later, but I think a lot of people neglect local press because they want the big national headlines. But in fact, the local press could actually be more useful to you than, the Telegraph. Because are your customers reading the Telegraph? But they might not be, but they might be reading, the local newspaper or listening to the local radio. That's where your customers are. And ultimately, the reason why you're doing this is to reach customers. So don't neglect the local press. And the local press is having tough times, but there are a lot of more niche, very, very local websites now. There's one in Bristol that are sort of independent journalism, and they're always looking for local stories. So going to local events, there's likely to be local journalists that you can meet, and building relationships with local journalists. You've got a connection because you're both based in the same place.
Yeah, I think you just tapped onto something that could be like a bit of a gem for businesses, that sometimes we're thinking to get ourselves exposed to the Telegraph or into Sky News or whatever, for example. But the local radio station in town, for example, or the local village newspaper or the town newspaper could be the place. Like you said, your audience are likely to be engaged in that proximity than engaging on a more higher scale. So that's a real gem that you just given there. I guess going on to my next question, as small businesses, how can we identify the right journalists for us, and also align ourselves with the right media outlets, whether it's our niche or our industry?
So the big thing is do your research, is find the publications that are relevant to your industry. So, that can be a bit of Googling, because, there are, particularly if you're a B2B business, there will be trade press, that's relevant to your industry that your business to business customers might be reading. So spend some time identifying those publications. Think about the newspapers, the radio stations, the TV stations that your audience are engaging with. Ask them, when you do feedback surveys, ask questions like, what do you read? What do you watch? How did you hear about us? Were we featured in something we might not know about? And that's the big thing about PR. It's not like hit and hope, as in, send 2,000 emails to 2,000 journalists and hope one of them will cover it. You'll get the best results if you're relevant and it's personalized. So, think about the journalists that are most useful for you. And then again, Twitter is very good for that, because you can search for terms that are relevant to your business that journalists might be using. And I think one of the neglected features on Twitter is Twitter lists. I think it still exists. I don't think Elon has deleted it, but it allows you to build lists of accounts. And then when you look at the list, you can only see those accounts. So it filters out the noise. So a tip I've often given is build a list of your key journalists that you want to target, and then look at that list, and you only see their tweets, and you can engage with them. You can make the list private so people don't know that you're doing it. So relevance is super important. And as I said, I think a lot of business owners forget to just ask their customers, what newspaper do you read, by the way? And, what radio station do you listen to? What podcast do you listen to? Because that could give you like a real insight into like a persona around your customers and the media that you need to be targeting. Obviously, I'm not saying neglect Sky News, BBC, the big things, because that is great for that credibility that I was saying. It might not necessarily lead to sales, but if you can say we've been featured on Sky News, that's a powerful thing for you to talk about. I know that a big thing for product businesses, big hit is This Morning. So the morning show on ITV.
Yeah.
They often do like reviews of products. If it's Valentine's Day, they'll review chocolate companies, or if it's St. Patrick's Day, they'll be reviewing Irish related businesses, for example. So, and they are looking for products to go on. So I know there's some businesses, they get featured on a show like This Morning and they will instantly see an uplift in sales. So again, are your customers watching daytime TV? Then you maybe want to get on This Morning, Loose Women, or the daytime TV shows. And it sounds quite hard to do, but if you find the right producer, it's relatively easy, because they need content. These shows, these publications, it's a daily show for 3 hours. They need stuff, and there are ways that you can reach them.
Yeah, no, that's good. That's good. I like the segment that you just mentioned about like even utilizing, if you are going to be looking at big nationwide outlets, being quite targeted. So like what daytime television programs are you listening to, or what podcasts are you listening to? Those sorts of approaches. The next question that I have for you is, what strategies can businesses use to establish meaningful relationships with journalists and create a lasting impression?
Again, I say this a lot, but it just comes back down to relevance, finding the people that are relevant to you and showing that you're useful and showing that you've got opinion. So keep saying it, but the biggest way to do it is nowadays on social, Twitter in particular, is to just build up a bit of an engagement. You flatter us a bit, and if we've written something, tweet us or say, oh, I love that piece you wrote about this, I really like what you said about this, or I really like that interview you did with this person. That always helps the ego, but it also shows that you've sort of paid attention. You've actually looked at something I've done. You haven't just seen my name, seen I'm a journalist and pitched. You've actually looked at something I've written and thought that I'm relevant to your business. So yeah, do a bit of that. And if we ask on Twitter, so it's something I was going to mention later, but there's a hashtag on Twitter called Journo Request, so #Journo Request. And a lot of journalists will tweet that I'm looking for a business owner, who can comment on something particular, #Journo Request. You can then reply. And a lot of journalists will use that for very quick things. So a big story is broken. I need a business owner's opinion and I need it in the next half hour. If you can reply and be relevant and directly answer what they're looking for, that will really help you build a relationship. And I have it myself. I've got a group of business owners I know have always got an opinion. They've always got something to say. And I know I could probably email them quickly and go, look, I'm writing about this. Have you got a quick quote you can send me, or can we have a quick chat? So that's a good way, is to be useful, is to just show that you can be useful to help that journalist do their job.
Yeah, and when it comes to, I think before we came into the live webinar, I made a comment about how slick you look today, which obviously it can, little things like that. It's human psychology, right? You're like you said, stroking the ego, or even just complimenting, being nice, right?
Yeah.
If you're nice, you are someone that is relatable as well. And I'm guessing persistency can help, if you're not being too naggy, but persistency in a good way can also, I'm assuming, get the journalist to pay attention to you as well, right?
Yeah.
So if you are listening, you are watching, go bombard Dan. he's giving you the license to bombard him with as many
Well,
comments.
oh no, what have I done? Yeah, I mean that's true. Persistence is far. You know, there's a lot of that often comes up like, you know, there's a classic thing when journalists, you know, often say, there's a classic line from mainly PR people that say, "Did you get, you know, an email? Hi Dan, did you get my press release?" And there's nothing necessarily wrong with that. Obviously, I might have missed it. I might not have seen it. There's absolutely nothing wrong with nudging me and going, "Oh, sorry, I missed it." Actually, it is relevant. So there's nothing wrong with being persistent. If it was just every day, did you get my press release? Did you get my press release? You know, that's when you see stories of journalists. They shouldn't do it, but they get particularly angry or particularly ranty and send not very nice messages. So yeah, persistence is absolutely fine. And to like things and like tweets and just to build up a relationship. And often you'll find that you may have emailed a journalist and you might think it's bang on, excuse me, exactly what they cover, but at that moment it isn't relevant, but we will have filed it and we'll come back to it. And, you know, 6 months later we'll go, what was that business owner that emailed me about that thing? That's relevant now. I'll give them a ring. And there's nothing wrong with emailing. And then, you know, I try to be nice and I'll say something like that. Oh, it's not relevant now, but it could be. So, you know, I've filed it and I'll let you know if it's useful. So yeah, persistence is good, but like with everything measured, like if you're, you know, if you're in sales, it's the same thing. You know, you have to nudge prospects, but at some point, you know that you're annoying them, and it's time to move on.
To back off. Yeah, no,
Yeah.
it's a good point. So psychology.
Yeah.
So can you give me any examples of like successful approaches, pitches that someone's come to you with that stuck out to you and in turn got you to feature them in one of your articles or one of your publications, or something that you've heard which like really blew your mind, which anybody can do? Can you give us any examples of that?
Yeah, I can't think of any specific, but the most relevant things are it's pitches. It's the subject line is quite a hard, you know, it's a tricky thing. People always ask, what should I put in my subject line to make you open my email? And the ones that stand out for me are just keywords that are like relevant to me. So, you know, words around small business entrepreneur story. With another hat on, with my partner, I run a blog, Lifestyle District, on the side, which is an arts and culture blog, mostly focused on Bristol. So
cheeky plug there.
Cheeky plug. That's all part of the media, but that you know, for that we're interested in art, culture, museums, galleries. So you know, if those kind of things are in the subject line, then it gets me going. Some things that you can do, but it won't work for all businesses, is to be very controversial. So you know, there's some pitches I've seen that have been shared on social where journalists the picture is a bit sweary, is a bit controversial. They've tied it into like a very, very controversial political event. And for certain publications that will work. You've probably seen like kind of like the kind of like lad Bible sort of videos that you see. That kind of thing. They like a PR stunt, something a bit weird, something a bit funny. So you can definitely get the attention of media like that by using controversy and humor. Wouldn't work for like, you know, a business publication, but you do see on Twitter some things that trend about, and journalists will often share their this is a super really weird pitch that I've had. I quite like stats and data, so journalists do like data. You've got surveys, data that can back up a thing. You know, you've done a report and 1,000 business owners have said this, and from this we've done this analysis. Data often interests me. I quite like a good sort of report that's looked in depth, looked into an issue that's relevant to small business owners. So if you can do surveys, but not kind of like you know, you've surveyed 200 people and 20 of them say, you know, 20% say they like the color red. You know, it's got to be something a bit useful, or analyzing existing data. You know, with like open data nowadays, a lot of people will often analyze like companies' house data about businesses and spot trends and then pitch it to journalists. And that's like, Whoops, sorry, my computer just went weird.
That's all
That's
right.
like that's I thought I'd lost connection, and so that's so that's like really really useful because again you're doing the work for us in a way. So controversy, humor can work, but it's all about relevance, thinking about the keywords for that journalist in the subject line that will make them open it. So I'm in Bristol, so if you're pitching the Bristol Post, which is the local paper here, Bristol business owner story might get them a bit like, oh, it's local, that's a local story. Simple things. Don't waste a subject line by putting press release and then the title, because a lot of people do that and you've just
Yeah.
lost it because so many people say press release. Press release isn't necessarily going to get me to open it, but what it's about might. That was a long-winded answer, but I hope that was useful.
No, that's good. That's good. The more long-winded, the more insightful it is. My next question is, so as we know, with anything in business, timing is very key. Timing is something that we can never get back. So it's extremely crucial. When we're reaching out to journalists, timing is very, very key. So what are some of the best practices for approaching a journalist with a timely and a relevant story?
So it's understanding how different journalists work. So I'm an online journalist, I'm freelance, so I'm writing for lots of different people. So I'm just writing all the time. I'm looking for stories regularly. So for one of my clients, I'm very focused on like news and politics. So that's obviously super fast moving. So I can I can be pitched all the time. Whereas like a Sunday newspaper journalist, is working on the Sunday Times or something, they've I think it's like probably by the Thursday they will do later stories, but a lot of the content will all be written and planned and sorted by the Thursday. So if you're trying to get in the Sunday papers, you might want to pitch them on the Monday or the Tuesday.
Yeah.
Other publications, so like the magazines, like the glossy magazines that do Christmas editions, they are already writing their Christmas magazines. Some of them will have started in June to plan what they're putting in their Christmas editions.
Gosh.
So if you're pitching Christmas content, so when you see a lot of these like gift guides, like 20 gifts to buy your wife this Christmas or your partner this Christmas, and it's like expensive stuff, cheap stuff, those kind of gift guides, that a lot of that comes through PR. So a business pitching their particular product. But they're planning that June, July.
Okay.
So if you're trying to get in Christmas magazines, you should be doing it now.
No,
There is
yeah.
actually a thing called Christmas in July. There's actually a massive show that happens in London every year. I went to it once. It's a bit weird. You go in July and it's all the products that are going to come out for Christmas, and you
Okay.
wander around and get samples. So July, the summer, is a key time for Christmas content. So that's like if you're in that market, I'd be pitching your Christmas stuff. And then for topical news, I always say a good way to get PR is to have an opinion. So it might not be directly related to your business, but it's just you've got an opinion, and you being quoted again is building that credibility and just getting your brand name out there. Because most journalists will say, whatever the name is, Joe Blogs, founder of whatever business, they'll mention your business. Some will link to your business, not always, but if it's online, you might get a link. So having an opinion is important. And in terms of the timeliness, that's just being on it. So, if a story is broken, a journalist is tweeting they need a reaction, just be on it, responsive, reply relevant with, yes, I've got that opinion. Look at how they've said they want to be contacted. So some will say, email me, my email address is in my bio, or DM me on Twitter, or I'll DM you and get, just read what they've said. Don't get carried away and do it wrong. And just be on it. And particularly important is if you've said, this is a real like sort of bugbear, like a journalist has asked for a particular person, they've responded, yeah, that sounds great. Can you DM me your phone number? I'll give you a call. And then they don't do it because they've not seen the tweet, and then that's super annoying. You've missed the opportunity. So be on it with news. If news is a way you want to do PR, yeah, you've really got to be on it.
Yeah. Yes, just to let everybody know before I carry on my questions, if you do have any questions that you want to ask Dan, I know that we're halfway through the webinar already. Some people may have missed the start, and Dan had been saying some great fiery bits. But if you've got any questions that we've not already covered that you want an answer to whilst we've got Dan here, please get them in the chat, and I'll get those questions over to Dan as soon as I can. I've got a question here from Elisa Hammond. She says, do you think local businesses should approach local media, and how do you go about finding the right person to contact? I think this is something we've already covered, but I'm sure that you'll be able to just...
Yeah, absolutely. Yes, Lisa, absolutely. Definitely. Every local business should contact their local paper because it's like a no-brainer. Local media need local stories, and if you're local, you've ticked a box straight away. It's still got to be an interesting story, a useful story, a relevant story. But if you're local, that's one of the boxes you've ticked. So yeah, use your localness to get into the local media. In terms of finding the right person to contact, if local papers, they don't necessarily now all exist in print, but the ones that exist in print, next to each apologies if people know what this means, but basically a byline is the name of the writer who's written the story. So when you see headline and underneath it will say the name of the journalist, that's the byline, that the author of the story. So there you've got the name, and then often then you can work out the email address. It's something at whatever the publisher is. Online, obviously, it's much easier. Most local papers, most local media put the contact details for journalists on their website. Loads of people don't look. Just go to a contact us, and often you'll see sports reporter, business reporter, news reporter, food reviewer, and it will have their email addresses. So all of like the live websites like Bristol Live, Birmingham Live, Manchester Live, all of those live local websites, all of those have the contact details on. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with just finding the local media reporter, dropping them a line and saying, hi, my name's Lisa, I'm from wherever you're from, I run this business, a couple of lines about it, would love to be featured, or reference a story that they've covered. There's nothing wrong with introducing yourself as a local business, and in fact local reporters will like that because they want to know what's going on in their local area. So there's, again, in my city, Bristol, where I am, there's a publication that regularly, a new restaurant launches, they write about it. They're not paying, the restaurant's not paying for it, that publication is just interested in the fact that a new restaurant has opened in this particular area. You won't get the national papers to write that, but your local press, they are interested. So yeah, you should absolutely contact local, and don't neglect radio, like local radio, because they've got hours and hours and hours of content to fill. Less so, shouldn't say political, but obviously the BBC cuts to local radio is affecting that to some extent, but they still need local stories. And often I've done it locally. There's a show where a presenter, she gets local people in to review the papers, that kind of like paper review, but not like the national papers. We all you get to pick 5 stories that you're interested in from any type of media, and you're on the show for half an hour just chatting with her about that. So yeah, think about local radio. And nowadays there's a lot of like community radio stations. They might be small and niche, but again, it's exposure, it's potentially reaching your audience. So yeah, definitely don't neglect local.
Yeah. So do small businesses have to pay to have, I think you mentioned there that some may not do, or some journalists are like happy or are even glad when people reach out to them. But are there cases where businesses have to pay to be featured in on the radio or in publications or in articles?
Then it's not PR. Then you're then moving into paid marketing. So yeah, unfortunately, sometimes mostly will probably happen in print. You'll contact a publication and then they'll say, oh, copying in our commercial team who can talk to you about advertising, because the story is very salesy. It's basically you're just pitching your product and they've seen an opportunity for advertising. So in that sense, then it's not PR. Then it becomes an advertising decision, and then you've got to decide: is it worth me paying to be featured? Is that worth it? It can be quite expensive, but it will work for some people. But when you see like in publications, it will say like advertorial or paid article. They basically paid to be featured. Sponsorship is very powerful, but it tends to be for the bigger businesses. You're unlikely to have to pay to go on radio or TV. And in fact, sometimes if you go on TV or radio, you actually get paid. If you become a sort of regular guest and you're commenting on big topics, you'll actually get a fee yourself for appearing. Some magazines will also pay a fee to the business owner. They tend to be the kind of human interest magazines, the kind of tragedies that have happened in a family, or those kind of stories. They will often pay a fee to the person they're interviewing. But in terms of paying for PR, it will usually be if you're pitching a big title and they think you might want to advertise. But again, that comes down to relevance. Like if I'm writing a story, I want business owner's opinion on a news story, and someone sends me an opinion, I'm not going to charge them for that because that's what I want. But if I get a big, massive sales pitch, I'm like, ultimately, to be frank, journalists aren't there to do your marketing. We're not there to write a massive story about this new product you've launched. So, it's pitching it that relevant, and it's not a sales pitch.
Yeah, I guess I've got a question when it comes to the relevance of PR for all sorts of businesses. So you mentioned there, like Christmas in July, for example, where they start advertising, or they bring forth some of the products that are going to be featuring at Christmas. Journalists start preparing their Christmas content from the middle of the year. Obviously, that's relevant or that can be very relevant for if you sell products or things like that, right? Does PR and does journalism exposure work for all sorts of businesses, or is it for a specific type of business?
Yeah, it can work for everybody. I mean, as I said, it's harder for B2B. So if you're a business to business, who's targeting other businesses, then in theory it's harder, but not necessarily, because obviously, say you're an accountant, so you're pitching. Obviously, you're looking for self-employed business owners. That's your target audience. You're obviously an expert in cash flow, finance, managing the numbers, tax efficiency, not tax evasion, all those kind of subjects. And obviously you can use PR to build your reputation in that. So publications such as UK Business Forums and others that are writing articles about a topic that's relevant, that's PR. So if a website is writing an article about cash flow, they do a call out for experts to give their cash flow tips. You as an accountant could pitch that. If you're doing something very, very, very technical, very niche, that's appealing to a very small but powerful audience, then there is going to be a trade publication for you. There are so many, like a friend of mine, I think she used to work for a magazine called Cement Monthly, which was a monthly magazine for the cement industry. So if you're a cement business, you want to be in Cement Monthly. So it's like targeting your niche. So it's finding the publication that works for you. Obviously, everybody thinks about the big media and wants to be on the telly and wants to be on the big radio stations, but that's not necessarily, that's not necessary for you. But if you're a B2B business, it's building your expertise, it's building showing off your knowledge. And going back to it again, nowadays podcasts are part of this. We're doing this kind of thing that's going to be a podcast. podcasts are like part of the media landscape now, and there's podcasts that are getting millions and millions and millions of listeners. So you might not be able to get on the Today program on Radio 4, but you might be able to get on an accounting podcast that's going to be listened to by your audience. I've just seen that comment. Yeah, I don't know if Cement Monthly still exists, but seek it out if you're in the cement industry.
So no, that made me chuckle. That actually made me chuckle. I can imagine getting stuck into Cement Monthly. My next question to you is, how can businesses leverage their unique selling points and brand story to attract journalists and attract interest and coverage from journalists?
It's again, it's finding what your story is, because when a lot of people first do PR, they go into it, they write a press release, and it's just a sales pitch. It's like, X company has launched this business, this product, it's amazing. Here's a quote. Can you write about it? And the journalist's like, well, no, there's nothing there. You're just selling me an ad. But what I am interested in is, how did you start this business? Why did you start this business? Where did you see the need for this product? How is it fulfilling that need? So it's like, before you pitch, spend a bit of time thinking what your story is. And although you think you haven't got a story, every business owner has got a story. There's a reason why you're doing what you're doing. It could be through redundancy and then it led to it, or it's the passion you've always had and you're finally doing it. So spend some time thinking about sort of key points in your journey that are a story that could be told, that could be interesting to other people, and then use those elements of your story to pitch it to the relevant publication. And then that fits around the brand as well. Your brand, the brand itself has a story, the product has a story, the reason it exists. There's a reason it exists. So, why does it exist? Why do you think people should buy this product? So yeah, it's finding to get your story out there. It's initially working out what your story is. And I think a very neglected sometimes page on a business owners' websites is the About Us page. Because I think the About Us page, generally, they can be a bit boring, like a description of what the business does. But that's a really nice place to put your story. So if you've got a really interesting backstory as an entrepreneur, put it on that page with images and, how you got to where you are. Because journalists do look at that stuff. If I get pitched, I'll go onto a business's website, I'll sort of have a look around. Have they had media coverage? Have they got anything about their story? And that will, that will get me interested. And, particularly COVID showed us that people really want to support local businesses.
Yeah.
And you might have an amazing website, but it might come across as a massive business, which is great in one way, because it people think, oh, it's a really successful business. But in other ways, they might not know that it's run by, one entrepreneur who lives locally. But if you've got your story, they might feel a bit more connected.
Yeah.
So the way to get your story out there is to work out what your story is in the first place.
Yeah. How? So just obviously we're living in a realm of time now where the robots are probably about to take over. Right, AI is on the rise. Well, AI has been about for a long time, but it's becoming the buzzword. Everyone's utilizing some of the resources. How can businesses utilize AI to leverage and package their story for journalists?
Yeah, the AI question, because of course the robots are coming to take my job. But but no, I think I'm not. We're all a bit like, what's happening with AI, and it's. I went to an event recently for journalists where we were all discussing, is this the end? Oh, have we lost our jobs? And we concluded, no, we can work with these robots. But I think for things like chat GPT, it is quite a powerful thing, maybe, to craft your pitch. So if you've worked out what your story is, but you're not an amazing writer and you don't quite know how to put it all together, you could put all that into chat GPT nowadays and just say, this is my story, write me 100 words pitch to a business journalist. And that is quite interesting. I think it's possible already, highly likely. I've possibly had emails that a pitch that has been written by AI, and I haven't necessarily noticed. You've got to be careful. Obviously, there's all this thing around, check how it's written, check the phrasing. You would hope that it's factually correct because you fed it the information that you want it to say. But I think that is quite interesting. I know it's definitely been discussed in the PR industry around, can AI actually help craft pitches? Obviously, there's image. One thing I did want to mention is, if there's anything you spend money on in this PR thing, is imagery, good imagery, or at least invest in a good phone that allows you to take good imagery, because images are so super important. And most journalists, online or offline, obviously they'll be doing video, but they still might want static images. They will want imagery. So have images ready for a journalist. There's nothing worse than going, can I just have a picture of you? And they're like, sorry, I haven't got one. And people take like a quick selfie, and it's not great. But there obviously are AI image generators, which are quite controversial. And there has been some publications, I think it was Time magazine, that did an AI image of Donald Trump, and they didn't say that it was AI generated, and it was published as a real image, and it was found out. So that could be a way, though, if you're transparent, if you want to craft like a quirky image that somehow illustrates your business, you could use AI image generator to create, particularly if you're doing like stats. So what I was saying about how journalists like surveys, they like data. If you've got some really powerful data, I'm assuming there's tools that exist for this, that you could put it into an AI and it would put it in a nice graph or a nice box. And then you could give that image to the journalist to use in their story. A lot of publications will design their own stats box, but not all of them will. If you've got a good image, in the old days used to be called an infographic. If you've got a good graphic, they might use it. So I don't think AI, I think you should use AI, but at the moment you've got to be careful. You've got to be careful with it and make sure that it's
right for you.
Make sure it's right. Make sure it's right for you.
Yeah. I think just to add to that as well, like creating infographics, just churning or spitting some information into something like Canva, for example, inputting some numbers, it'll quickly spit out a good pie chart or some nice graphics related to what you've inputted in. So I guess this leads me into my next question. Press releases are, I'm assuming, a standard when it comes to PR. Very, very effective tool. But what are the elements that businesses should include in a press release to maximize its impact?
Yeah, so it's interesting. There's a lot of debate about, are press releases dead? Is it the end of the press release? No, I don't think it is. They're still super relevant. Not every journalist is going to use your press release directly to write a story. So some will, like some publications, if it's relevant enough, will take your press release and pretty much republish it, like slightly tweak it and use it as a story. But what it is useful for, pretty much for all of us, is a useful background thing. So if I've asked you, pitch me just out of the blue with like, this is what we do, please see our latest press release, that it can help to just build a bit of a story around the business. The key things, the way to write one, the old-fashioned ways, and it's still relevant, what we were told, they get told in PR school, is the inverted pyramid method. So it's an upside down triangle. So the most important information at the top, and as you move down the press release, it's less and less important. So you've got to think about, if the journalist is going to write your story, they're going to use your press release, what is the most important things you hope they would write? Put those at the top in a way that's like not too salesy. And then key questions to ask are, I've got to get this right, is who, when, what, where, how, and why. So those, you don't necessarily need to address all of them, but basically that sort of makes it a story. Like, who is it happening to? Who's involved? Why is it happening? When's it happening? Where's it happening? And that relates to a product being launched or an event or a survey, just, to make it newsworthy. And that's a big thing as well. Like, is it news? If you want a journalist to write your press release and not just using it for background, is it actually news? Is it new? Is it newsy? Would anybody else be interested in it beyond you? I get press releases still about a business opening a new office. Now, that is not of interest to me. I'm not going to write a story about a business opening a new office, but it might be relevant to the local paper if it's part of, say, a regeneration project in a city. So yeah, it's make it relevant. Quotes are important. So do include a quote. So, ex founder of this business said, but try and make the quote quotable, as in it isn't just an ad. It isn't just an advert. It's not just this product's amazing. We're so happy to launch it, and we know that customers are going to love it. Make it think about where it's going. So if it's in an advice publication, like a lot of things I write for, make the quote have a tip within it. So the quote itself has got a tip, or the quote is funny. Like if humor is relevant, the quote is controversial. If you're pitching, something political, something controversial, if you're campaigning for an issue, make the quote controversial, because that might work. And the journalist is more likely to include the quote. And then one of the big things, there was a tweet actually that trended on Twitter last week, or got really popular. It was a journalist said, please stop using PDFs. And I'm sort of with her on that. Like, PDFs are sometimes a journalist nemesis, because the temptation is to PDF your press release, make it look so nice, put your logo on it, use an amazing font. Problem with PDFs is when you try and copy and paste often, the formatting is just super weird. So you say you really like the quote in the press release, you want to copy and paste it into the publishing system you use. Often it's weird. So avoid PDFs. They work, obviously, if you've got a glossy report or, then that's useful. But if you're doing a press release, my top tip would be just put it in the body of the email. So a short introduction, and then put the text of the press release in the email. That's fine. You can attach it as well as a Word document or something similar, something editable. But yeah, try and avoid PDFs, because again, it's sort of we might be a bit lazy, but we're like busy, and the easier you can make it, the more likely you are to get coverage, because it can be so easy just to I like this press release. Oh, the formatting is weird. I've got another one that's similar. I'll use that one instead. So to cut a long story short, yeah, press releases are relevant, but just think about. And the other thing as well, I mentioned it earlier, but when you send a press release, also send images. It's good to send images immediately. Don't attach them to the email. Have them on something like Dropbox or Google Docs. Please see a link to our images. And in terms of images to use, it's pictures like, it can be you at a desk, or if you've got a physical business, you in your shop. Also, think about different types of images that might work for different types of publications, and make them as high res as possible. Online, they don't need to be super, super high res, but a newspaper will want a really high res image. So, think about that as well.
No, that's extremely concise. Extremely concise. I'm mindful of time. I've got so many other questions to ask, and I'm sure that some of the audience members that will probably watch afterwards, and probably later days as well, will have questions. Before I rattle off my last couple of questions, Dan, what is the best way for people to get hold of you and contact you if they've got any further questions or they have any inquiries?
Yeah, I'm absolutely happy for people to contact me. You can look at my website, which is danmartinuk.com. So that's my website, danmartinuk.com. And my email address is dan@danmartinuk.com. And also, again, I'm a big tweeter. So Twitter is my probably biggest platform that I use. And I'm Dan_Martin on Twitter. And I'm also on LinkedIn as well. But yeah, I'm very happy. I'm always happy. Small business owners is what I do. So I'm always happy to hear from entrepreneurs with good stories.
Yeah, no, that's great. That's great. So if you are watching now, you're going to watch later, you're going to watch 10 years from now. Hopefully that website will still be alive 10 years from now. And you'll be able to get hold of Dan with any questions that you may have. So before we close off, I've literally got 5 questions, but I'm not going to ask those 5 questions. What are the top 3 tips, Dan, that you would give to somebody trying to get themselves known to the world, their product to their local and also national? What are the top 3 bits of advice that you would give to any small business owner when it comes to PR, journalism, all that jazz?
The biggest one is pause, don't get carried away, and do your research. Find the relevant publications that are right for you. Don't just hit and hope, waste your time emailing thousands of journalists that aren't going to cover your story and are going to get angry that you've contacted them. Pause, look for the relevant stories, the relevant publications, media that's right for your business. Number 2 would be build the relationship with journalists, like use social media to build relationships, be useful, flatter them, read what they've said, just start to become like a person of use to that journalist, and they're going to contact you regularly, repeat business. And then number 3 is don't forget to use the PR that you've got. That's often neglected. So you might have got a story and it's like, super amazing. Talk about it. So, tell your audience, tell your customers you've got this coverage. One warning, though, is be very careful. It's very tempting to, if you've been featured in a print publication, so, like a newspaper or magazine, you do see it on social media, where you take a photo of that coverage, tweet it and say, me holding up the newspaper. Officially, you can be fined for that there, because the public, officially you can be fined, and businesses are. I know it's a little bit of a warning, but the publication owns the copyright, even if it's you featured. And the way PR companies get around it is they have to pay a license. They pay a license that they're able to reproduce the publication. So be careful about, I know you'll still see it, but in theory, it's copyright breach. So what you can do is, if you've been featured online, so if you've been an online version of the story, you can share the online link. No problem. There's no problem with that. And talk about it on your website. Again, you need to be careful. Officially, you're not meant to take logos of publications and put them on your website, although you do see that. Officially, you're not meant to do that. But ways to get around it is maybe a picture of you that you do own, and you can write in text, as featured on BBC News, with a link to the BBC News story on the BBC News website. So I think a lot of people sort of don't communicate they've got press coverage. I mean, you want to tell people you've got this great story, and you will find that, I see it all the time, that loyal customers will be really excited to know, that a business they support has been featured in a publication, and they'll probably congratulate you about it. So the tips are: do your research, build relationships, and then when you get PR, use it to generate more PR.
Yeah, no, that's amazing. That's really good to know. And I am really, really happy with some of, not some, 99.99% of everything that you said today, Dan, because it was really, really packed full of genuine things that people can apply right now to the businesses as well. If you do have any questions, Dan has said and given us permission for you to get in contact with him via his website, which is in the chat there. We'll also be sending some follow-up emails as well to everyone that registered for this, with a bit more info about Dan and how further you can contact him as well. So if you are watching now, later on, 10 years time, do go ahead, take advantage of the knowledge and the value that you will get from Dan. And also stay tuned for our upcoming webinars on UKBF Talks. Whatever platform you're watching on, like, subscribe, share this content as well, because we know that, especially if you've been watching from the beginning, PR is extremely important for businesses. Building that long-term awareness, that long-term cohesion with our audience is extremely important. And he's given us the nuggets on exactly how to do that. So share this with as many people that you believe it will help and affect their businesses, their brands. And don't keep it to yourself. Don't be stingy. So on that note, I'm going to say thank you very much for your time today, Dan. Really, really appreciate it. Really, really appreciate you getting a fresh trim just for today as well. It's not gone unnoticed. You know, any final words before you go?
No, I'm just happy, delighted to be here. It's been great. It's nice to be back in my old stomping ground of UKBF, and all the best of luck to all those business owners out there.
There we go. On that note, we're going to say goodbye, and yeah, we'll see you on the next one of UKBF Talks. See you soon.